Good afternoon and welcome. Welcome to this memorial to honor the life and legacy of our beloved head of school, Robert S. Goldberg. My name is Juan Carlos Van Hool. I'm the Chief Development Officer here at the Benjamin School and a proud alum. During this event, you will hear from people who have been touched by Bob in some way or another. Chances are, if you're in the audience today, you have your own story about Bob, even the little ones. I first met Bob here at the grand opening of Benjamin Hall in 2015. Some would say this $11 million performing arts theater, 850 seats, was one of his crowning achievements during his tenure at Benjamin. In the lower and middle school campus, we're currently building the STEM Center, which would not have been possible without Bob's efforts and his fundraising prowess. He never will get to see that facility completed. However, I was lucky enough to walk with him in the construction site earlier this year, and we got his reaction on tape. We put it together in a promotional video that you may have seen earlier this year. We have it now ready for you, and please take a look at the screens.
This is really outrageous. Wait till the teachers and the kids get in here. We're looking at science, technology, engineering, and math combining, and we're looking at students combining to do the different pieces to create an object or to create a project. So this is just hand-tailored for our program.
Yeah, I still remember that day vividly. Back in January, when we walked through the construction site with the division heads, Bob's excitement was palpable. You could feel it. But for Bob, it wasn't all about buildings. He was all about people. Our students, our teachers, our parents, our trustees, our alumni, parents of alumni, grandparents, friends of the school, and of course his family. It wasn't about him, it was about you. Bob was my boss, but he was much more than that. He was my mentor and my friend. I would sit with him in meetings with parents, and he would let parents talk for an hour or more. And then he would ask even more questions because he wanted to know more about them. It's how he knew each child's name and each family's story. So in the next hour or so, there may be moments of sadness. You'll hear from those who knew him well, including his family. But Bob wouldn't want you to dwell on the sadness. He would ask you to reflect on your interactions with Bob and how he had an impact on your life. I bet you will recall moments of joy and, of course, lots of laughter. We're going to continue now this afternoon with some remarks now from a friend of the Goldberg family. We're talking about Rabbi Alan Litwack, a senior rabbi at Temple Sinai.
So many of you knew him in lots of different ways. I got to see him as a grandfather and as a father and somebody who shared in the joy of seeing his family succeed and do wonderful things. I want to share some remarks as an educator. A few weeks ago at the memorial service, I taught about a story that comes from the biblical book of Samuel. In the story, a wise woman is speaking to King David about how short life is. And in the Hebrew, it says, Ki mot namut, we all must die. We are like water spilled on the ground, which cannot be gathered up. Life, the wise woman says, passes quickly. It is like water spilled onto a thirsty ground. It sinks into the earth and it is no more. Now, this metaphor for life seems troubling. if life is like water, absorbed by the parched earth, does it mean that all we are and all we have done and all that we have stood for is gone forever, absorbed into the sands of time? As I said a few weeks ago, I don't believe so. Implied in the wise woman's words is a consoling truth. Even if our lives are like water absorbed into the earth, it does not mean that our lives are therefore futile. Is water that is spilled in the ground truly lost? Isn't it not true that precisely this submerged water that makes life possible? It is the rain and the dew that falls on the ground that ensures life. Without it, we would perish. And this is the way it is with the life of the Spirit. Our parents and the many generations who preceded them poured out the water of their lives, their dreams, their hopes, and they have been absorbed into the earth. You and I, we are the harvest. They have given us not only our bodies, they've given us our minds, our appreciation of the good and the true, our will to live and achieve. We have absorbed into our personality the spilled waters of their lives, just as we, in turn, will be absorbed into the lives of our children and our children's children. What is true of each of us in our individual lives is even truer of a teacher whose life reaches out into many lives and helps shape the spirits of several generations. The fresh, sweet waters of knowledge that flow from his lips helps awaken the seeds of idealism, of goodness, and of service in the hearts of children and adults alike. We know that Mr. Goldberg's years have come to an end. Bob's life was like water spilled on the ground that cannot be gathered up again. But what he watered with his life has grown and developed and continues as a force in the lives of those whom he has touched. In a moment, I will chant the prayer called El Malei Rachamim out of the Jewish tradition. The prayer asks God, V'yitzror b'yitzror ha'chaim et nishmato. May his soul be bound up in the bonds of life eternal, and may his memory always be treasured as a blessing. For so many, we say this as a request. For Bob Goldberg, we don't need to ask this. It's an affirmation of what we already know, that through his life as a husband, as a father, as a grandfather, and particularly in this moment, as a lifelong educator, that he will be loved and remembered, honored and respected. The lessons he taught will continue to nurture the growth of our community and society long after his name is forgotten. I'm going to invite you to stand. Rachamim, Shochen Bamromim, Hametzeh Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei HaShechina, Im Kedoshim Utehorim, Kezohar Harakia, Mazhirim, Et Nishmat Shimshon Raphael Ben Tzamach Verut Shehalach Le'olamo Ba'al Harachamim Yastirehu B'Seter Knafav Le'olamim Vitzror, Vitzror HaChaim, Et Nishmato, Adonai Hu Nachalato, V'yanuach B'Shalom, Al Mishkavo. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Bob Goldberg, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in your eternal presence, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. You can be seated. I want to end on a slightly funny note, and that is, for those of us who knew Bob, we knew that he loved food. You can go ahead and laugh. He loved food, loved eating, and in Judaism, we see eating as life-affirming. So I've been asked to encourage you that at the end of our memorial service that you stay with us. There will be a reception immediately following, I believe, the Healy Athletic Complex. And please join us for a little food as a way of honoring his life.
Thank you, students, for that wonderful performance. And now we're going to hear from someone who knew Bob for the last 14 years professionally, but also they were very, very close friends. I'm talking about the executive director of the Florida Council of Independent Schools, Barbara Hodges. The FCIS is the agency that makes sure that Benjamin remains a top-tier school here in the state.
Good afternoon. Rona, Bob's family, the Benjamin community, colleagues, friends. What a privilege it is to speak today at the memorial service for my dear friend and colleague, Bob Goldberg. You know, it's been 3 weeks, and those 3 weeks have passed quickly. And yet I can remember vividly the morning of Sunday, March 10th, when I received the news that Bob had passed away. I was sitting in a meeting in Washington, D.C. I got a text, and suddenly the world literally looked dimmer. Dimmer. Why? I believe a truly bright light. Remember the picture that we saw earlier? That picture, I knew nothing about that picture before today. A truly bright light had passed from our midst. The loss was felt not only by this community, by his family, his close friends, but by all those who had the good fortune to cross paths with Bob. During one of our conversations after he had learned that he had cancer, Bob told me that he really didn't understand why people were so kind to him, so nice to him. Of course, we do understand, because Bob was that model of kindness and grace. He had that unique ability to make each person that he encountered feel as if they were valued. He had that special light. You know, as executive director, I had to send out a letter to the 158 school heads. And I began to get responses from those individuals. And I want to read to you just some of the words that were sent back about Bob Goldberg. And these are literal quotes. He brought humor and joy to everyone he interacted with. Are you beginning to hear those themes of joy and humor and light and inspiration? A heart of gold. Sense of humor that could light up any room. If we stop, we can even hear that little laugh still in the background, right? It stays with us. It remains a part of us. Incredible man. Bob Goldberg was an outstanding head of school. It's something that I've dedicated my life to. He dedicated his life to school. Some of his colleagues, other heads of school, have even called him a good school man. Now, for those of you who are not in that particular area, you may think that is a very strange term. Among heads of school, that is a very big compliment. A good school man. Education was in his blood. As soon as he stepped out of undergraduate school, he taught, he was a division head, he was the head of several very fine schools. He served as the head of the Pinecrest campus in Boca Raton. He was here for 11 years, and look at the tremendous work that he did. During that tenure as head of school, Bob was actually elected to the board of directors of the Florida Council of Independent Schools, and that was an election done by his peers. He was revered by his peers. He was loved by his peers. And it was during that time that Bob and I both served as heads of school and as fellow FCIS board members that we developed our close friendship. Bob became a very treasured colleague and a treasured friend. I valued his professional counsel. As a head of school, when things were not going well, and by the way, for those of you who sometimes I know heads of school, Bob always looked happy He always looked like everything was going well. Sometimes things aren't going well, right, Rona? My husband would know that as well. When I had one of those days and there was no one to talk to, Bob and I had this thing where we would call each other on our private lines. I'd call him, he'd get on the phone, I'd tell him whatever was going on, and by the end of that conversation, he would have me laughing and looking at it from a totally different perspective. He was that kind of friend. And yet his words were always wise. Wise counsel, lots of joy. You know, just like others, I felt uplifted by the relationship with Bob Goldberg. He had that way of always making everything really different, from a different perspective, more joy, more light. There is no doubt that Bob Goldberg was an outstanding educator, no doubt. A superb headmaster. But even greater, Bob Goldberg was an exceptional human being. His legacy at the Benjamin School and in the state of Florida, the Florida Independent Schools, will be felt for many years to come. His list of accomplishments is great. But the greater impact of Bob Goldberg's life is actually felt by the people whom he touched. One of our fellow colleagues said, quote, "A huge empty space will be felt by all of those that he left behind." And for that, I want to take these final moments to thank Bob for modeling for his family, the Benjamin School community, for his friends, his colleagues, what it truly means to be a human being, displaying kindness and joy that brings light to so many. And now, with his passing, he's passed the torch to each of us to take that opportunity to be models for our young people who are within our schools today, who are within our families today, to take the time to make others feel valued and important. So as I close, I want to thank you, Rona, and your family for all the times that you shared Bob with us. I know there were great sacrifices. As a head of school, there's no way that he was able to give all that time to his family. And his life made a difference to so many. And I want to thank Bob Goldberg. His life has had a tremendous impact on all of us. And for that, we are eternally grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara, for those words. Bob always believed Benjamin's #1 asset was our teachers, and we want to get the perspective now from our faculty. We have Joan Marie Gerritsen, who's a beloved pre-K teacher here at Benjamin. She's going to speak next.
Afternoon. For those of you whom I have not had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Joni Gerritsen. I've been given the opportunity to teach pre-kindergarten at the Benjamin School for many years now. This position has taught me plenty. On the lighter side, it has allowed me to develop a keen awareness of taste testing gourmet jelly beans. It has even introduced me to very important vocabulary words such as shimmery. Years back, I even had a little one ask if I had a brain. I replied, "Yes, I'm sure I have a brain." He proceeded to look in my ear and innocently responded, "Are you sure, Mrs. Gerritsen? I do not see one. It is dark in there." However, the most wonderful thing I have learned from hundreds of children is that they have taught me more than I have ever been able to teach them. I stand before you today humbled, emotional, honored, and most importantly, thankful. In the words of Winnie the Pooh, how lucky I am to have had something that makes saying goodbye so hard. In our lifetime, we have different paths and different journeys along the way. I am forever grateful that my journey and my path has intertwined with Bob Goldberg's. I am a stronger person because of it. There's no doubt each and every one of you feel the same. When Bob's name comes to mind, we not only think of a brilliant man, but a humble man who was always truthful, fair, sincere, generous, and full of strength and encouragement. He always found the good in each of us, making us truly believe in ourselves. Bob's smile and laughter would radiate a room. He gave off a natural, positive energy, bringing out the absolute best in each one of us. Bob taught us all a very important lesson. A simple act of kindness can make a big difference. For many of us, myself included, when a photograph is displayed, we often look for ourselves first. Not Bob, as it was never all about him. It was all about you and I. Absolutely amazing to think. Always about each and every one of us. He was never boastful or concerned about himself. Making sacrifices and helping people was his nature. In my opinion, legacy is a very overused word these days. It seems that everyone and everything has to have one. But with Bob, it is true. He has left behind a very real legacy. His legacy will continue to guide each of us in the way we do things at the Benjamin School for generations to come. Indeed, each of us have a number of stories we now cherish of the moments we were gifted with Bob in our presence. I feel extremely blessed that I am able to openly share a few of my stories with all of you. During Bob's first few months at the Benjamin School, I was in my classroom early one Monday morning prior to the children arriving. The telephone rang. I glanced over at the caller ID, and it read, Robert Goldberg. Not knowing Bob too well yet, my heart began to race as I thought, what have I done? Why is our new head of school calling me so early on a Monday morning? I pretty much froze. I answered the telephone to hear Bob's cheerful voice, small-talking at first. I quickly felt at ease as I realized we had a number of things in common. We were both raised by parents from the greatest generation. We drank out of garden hoses and survived, suffered extreme sunburns during the summer months, played outside until the streetlights came on, and could most likely recite word for word each and every Beach Boys song. More importantly, though, we both understood the value of a fine, independent education. It was then I realized that the Benjamin School was going up, up, up and away. After small talking, Bob proceeded to ask me if I could find some time to sit down with him to brainstorm ideas to perhaps add a 3-year-old program to our existing grade levels. I immediately responded, "Of course, are you on my campus today?" With his quick wit, laughter, and humor, Bob replied, "Yes, I am on the Gerritsen campus all day today." Through the years, he would often enthusiastically joke in passing, and he would comment, "Wow, the Gerritsen campus keeps getting better and better." In true Bob fashion, he always found compliments to make each of our days. Again, when Bob was fairly new at the Benjamin School, he came to me after one of our pre-kindergarten fall music performances, a long-standing tradition in the lower school. He asked, "Joni, how do you get so many 4- and 5-year-olds up on the stage doing what they do so successfully and all with a smile?" Because I myself sometimes speak through the eyes of the little ones without thinking, I replied, "Bob, we do things simply in pre-kindergarten. We seal our deals with pinky promises, a binding foundation of trust. And when you are 4, you work very hard to keep those promises." He laughed and commented, Perhaps we all need to look at life through the eyes of our youngest learners. Little did I know, at that moment, Bob would never forget pinky promises. My next and last story was a poignant moment that will remain with me forever. On the evening of February 19th, several weeks ago, I had a 5:30 meeting scheduled on the upper school campus. I arrived early to find the lobby lights dimmed and Lola working in her office. After chatting a while, Bob came through his office door and immediately walked over to me with one of his big hugs. But this was a different kind of hug. It was at this moment I realized something was very, very wrong. He began to thank me for all I do for the children and families at our school. He said, "It is not just what you teach them, but how you treat them." With tears in my eyes, I stopped him and said, "Bob, we all need to thank you for all you do for us and for treating us the way you do." I continued, Look at this place. Look at where we are, how far we have come under your leadership. Just look at it. It is incredibly remarkable." Although frail, with his quick wit once again, he replied, "Incredibly remarkable. I like that." He continued, "Joni, seriously, promise to keep doing what you do and always remember to keep moving forward." At that moment, he raised his pinky finger and continued, "Pinky promise?" I replied, "Pinky promise." I knew this was my final goodbye to a wonderful friend. Every one of us who knew Bob and worked alongside him, whether things were going well or badly, will remember him with great affection. When all is said and done, no matter how much you love your work, it is the people you meet in it that truly matter. And colleagues like Bob are something very special. You do not come across many of them, and when you do, they leave a lasting impression. Bob is not gone. He will live within all of us, and we will carry him always. As I come to a close of this tribute to a great leader, and most importantly, a genuine friend, I ask that in honor of Bob, that we always keep our pinky promises and stay the course in good times and in bad, and continue rallying together to build upon the legacy that Robert Scott Goldberg has so generously left us with. These promises will no doubt ensure that our little schoolhouse remains second to none for always and forever.
As you saw there, Bob loved spending time with our students. He would love to visit the WOW classrooms, our pre-K 3 students, or loved having lunch with our seniors. So we want to get our perspective from our students here. And we're going to hear now from Josh Green, who is the Student Council President.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is truly an honor to be here addressing the entire Benjamin School community. There's always something different and special when members from both campuses, students, faculty, others both past and present, come together as one. For this reason, full disclosure, I'm extremely nervous. I speak every week in front of my high school peers and have even addressed crowds not much smaller than this one, but I've only had the slightest of butterflies as if I'm going out onto Theophilus Field to play a football game. But, as I said, today is different. This difference comes in that this is the most important, if not the most important, one of the most important things I've ever done. Today is so important because of the impact Mr. Goldberg made on everyone, as individuals and as a community. With some shoddy math I found from a website, it is estimated that I, along with my classmates from the class of 2019, have met over 14,000 people in our lives. Of those 14,000 people, few truly leave an impression. Something has to be different, you know, to have a distinct recollection of these passing interactions. I remember when I met Mr. Goldberg. I was in second grade when he was appointed as our new head of school. I vividly remember sitting on our colorful red carpet in the back of our classroom. This was the type of carpet that had a plane traveling to all 50 states or something of the sort, although I could probably point out a few states at that time. As a second grader, I highly doubt that I was able to comprehend exactly who was coming in to read to us when our teacher told us that the head of school was coming in. All I knew is that my friends and I were going to be able to sit back, relax, and enjoy a good picture book. But incredibly, the events of that day profoundly began to shape the rest of my life, simply because I met Mr. Goldberg. Those who know me know that I was and still am a very talkative kid. While on the surface this caused and still does cause occasional headaches for my teachers, Mr. Goldberg heard me on a different level. Being my second grade self, I was quick to ask and answer questions, loudly. Perhaps me being an overly enthusiastic storybook listener caught his attention. As we were all introduced to his charisma and charm, he made sure to say hello to every single kid in that room. He made us all feel special in our own way. When it came to my turn to be introduced to our new authority figure, I didn't know what to expect. Mr. Goldberg pulled me aside and told me, "You're going to be the president one day." Of course, many young children dream of becoming the president and are told by others that they can be whatever they want to be with other cliche motivational tactics. But this was an important man giving me his honest first impression. So when I was with my parents at school just a few weeks later, and Mr. Goldberg repeated that in front of them, from that moment on, he was going to call me El Presidente. I knew that not only did he believe in me, but that I could believe in myself. Fast forward a decade, and here I am representing the students of this school as the president of Student Council. When I was hesitant to run for freshman class president, I remembered how every time my family would run into Mr. Goldberg, I wasn't just another student. No, I was Josh Green, El Presidente. And when Mr. Goldberg learned of my becoming student council president, all he needed to tell me was, "I told you so." He helped mold me as a man, and it started because he made me feel important every time we spoke, and I cannot thank him enough for doing that. But I'm certainly not the only student to be profoundly impacted in the time that Mr. Goldberg served us. With that being said, I wanted to fulfill my role as El Presidente and allow for my peers to have their experiences with Mr. Goldberg heard vicariously through me. So one student who is new to the Benjamin School this year vividly recalls his first interaction with Mr. Goldberg. Nervous starting his junior year at a new school, Mr. Goldberg told this student that he loved his charisma and for him to be himself. That happened in August, And this student said that this has helped him adapt to his new surroundings and even thrive. Although he only knew Mr. Goldberg for a brief time, this student was deeply impacted by the few encounters that he had with our great leader. He helped make this student feel important. Another student, one who actually graduated Benjamin a few years ago, posted this about his time knowing Mr. Goldberg. I quote, "I'm going to miss the chats in between classes and after school that lasted sometimes an hour. You put a smile on the face of every student who knew you. A great head of school, but an even better person." This student's recollection of his time with Mr. Goldberg speaks volumes. When a student sat down to talk to Mr. Goldberg about an issue, something great, or really nothing crucial at all, it wasn't just going to be another let's get this over with type of conversation. We all know Mr. Goldberg had a way with words, and it didn't matter if it was at a school-wide assembly or simply in his office. He always gave every student his all. He always made each student feel important. My last example is a more universal one. It would be hard to find a student that couldn't tell you that they didn't get an extra boost from seeing Mr. Goldberg at performances, games, or other high-pressure situations. Several athletes have shared with me that simply seeing Mr. Goldberg as they ran out onto the field calmed them down and then gave them a sudden boost of energy because they wanted to show him their very best efforts. Mr. Goldberg brought out the best in us because his presence was so important. As I close today, I wanted to leave you all with something to think about, as Mr. Goldberg often did when he would address us. For those of you who have been at Benjamin as long as I have, you know the character trait steps that lead up to the Fine Arts building at the lower school. They read respect, courage, morality, kindness, fairness, integrity, compassion, acceptance, forgiveness, gratitude, perseverance, and responsibility. In order for students to live by these words, our leaders must show us how. Mr. Goldberg exuded these traits. Kind and accepting to every student regardless of their background. Courageous to bring the school to new heights and to fight so valiantly the way he did. And persevering through his troubles to try to be at school every single day. Pick any one of these traits. Mr. Goldberg demonstrated them and led by example. The test of a great role model, mentor, leader, and also friend is knowing what's important in life. We, the students, were that to Mr. Goldberg, and he made sure he knew it. And now, we must continue his legacy by carrying out these traits, but most importantly, by following his example, by making everybody in our lives feel important when we are with them. Thank you.
Josh Green, living our Benjamin traits. Thank you. Great words. As many of you know, the relationship between the head of school and the trustees is a vital relationship in making sure that the school is running smoothly. Bob had a great professional relationship with many of the trustees, but he was also very close to them and friends with many of them, past and present. The guy who hired him, who brought him here to Benjamin, his boss, is here today, and that is Dan Stanton, the former chair of our Board of Trustees.
In the late spring and summer of 2007, the Benjamin School had a crisis on its hands. There was general displeasure with the performance of the then head of school. The school year ended with a series of unfortunate incidents involving several students, and there was a very negative and widespread reaction about the manner in which the head handled everything regarding these events. The last board meeting that school year was in May, and it ended in an executive session. And to say that the head of school had received a no confidence vote would have been a very kind summary. The tough news for me was that at the conclusion of that May meeting, the chairman of the board for the next few years was about to become me. And I'll spare you all the details of what ensued from there, but suffice it to say that by July we had terminated the head, and we hired an interim head, a wonderful man by the name of Jim Young, to serve as head for the 2007-2008 school year. We formed a search committee and went to work on finding a new head for Benjamin. At that point, including our interim head, hard to believe, but Benjamin had had 4 heads of school in the previous 5 years. We felt it was critical for the school to have a leader that would bring consistency and continuity to the school that had been sorely lacking. We had some wonderful candidates, but it became increasingly clear that there was one front-runner. I first met Bob in what must have seemed to him to be an endless gauntlet of interviews. Parents, teachers, administrators, board members. We tried to hit all the constituencies in this process. In the end, we felt that the final okay needed to come from a group of 3. And that group was David Lambert, Jack Purcell, and myself. The stakes were high in getting this choice right. You know, the revolving door for the heads of school really had to stop. I have to tell you that I came from a background of interviewing potential new hires all the time, and as a result, I had a pretty refined sense of what questions were fine to ask in an interview and what were at a minimum frowned upon, if not totally illegal. The head that we had terminated previously really liked to espouse his views on social issues, politics, and things of that nature. It was not well received by the parents, frankly, and just couldn't be done going forward. And as a result, Bob and I had one more one-on-one. To say it broke all the rules would be an understatement. We talked about politics, social issues, his marriage, his family, and the grandfather of all off-limit topics, religion. Political correctness was parked at the door, and we really got into these topics with the gloves off. We just wanted to make sure that whatever Bob's views were on potentially controversial issues, they did not enter the workplace and the Benjamin community. To be candid, I was really nervous about it. We really liked Bob, and were so hoping these shortcomings of some of his predecessors would not be an issue for him. As much as it broke all the rules, I wish I had that meeting on video. It turned into an unvarnished, raucous laugh festival with Bob causing and leading the laughter. We finished up, and I was 100% sure that we had our man. Over the years, we both reflected on that day and felt a line from the movie Casablanca sort of summed it up. I think this could be the beginning of a beautiful friendship. Bob dug in deeply and tried to meet everyone and understand every issue the school was facing. It was like drinking from a fire hose, but he loved every minute of it. His work ethic was legendary. I'd call the office at 10 p.m. sometimes, and he'd almost always answer. He loved the job. He loved the kids. He loved the challenge. And he loved, perhaps more than anything, as has been said already today, being an educator and guiding the educational process for over 1,000 kids each year at the school. Over time, Bob evolved from being the new guy to the familiar face that everyone expected to see. He really became the face of Benjamin. We finally achieved the consistency and continuity we had been seeking. I tried to think of the right word to describe the relationship Bob had with Benjamin and that which the school had with Bob. And I think that symbiotic is as close as I can get. It's a word that denotes a mutually beneficial relationship between two people or groups. It became irrefutable that Benjamin benefited from Bob's presence. I know personally how much Bob benefited in terms of fulfillment and psychic income from his relationship with both the school and the people that comprised it. I had the good fortune to see Bob in action when all was well and also in times of stress. He never lost his cool. He always tried to be measured and fair. He had a kindness and compassion for students and parents when they were going through rough circumstances. He also had an impeccable moral compass that always pointed true north. And it guided him in his decision-making. He was able to be kind and forgiving when the situation dictated it, and also able to be tough when the circumstances were clearly outside the guardrails that could be tolerated. I always found it amazing that on a given day he could visit with the WOW 3-year-olds or the pre-K and play or read stories with them, and then walk back to his office to meet with an irate parent on some issue. He was pretty much flawless at both ends of that spectrum. I used to drive home after having met with Bob and reflect on just how much of a glass-half-full guy he was with regards to the school and particularly with regards to the kids. He was first and foremost an educator, and he knew his craft in that role as well as anyone. He was a leader that tried to put the school and the children ahead of all the distractions that he had to endure. We had a great friendship, but when we had an argument, it was explosive. There were times we went at each other so aggressively, I'm surprised that Jerry Cole didn't call 911. In the end, however, on each topic and in each crisis, we were always stood together in our view. I trusted him completely. I hope he felt similarly about me. As much as the dark side did rise up every so often, the majority of our work together was filled with laughter. That laughter continued through email up until just a handful of weeks ago. I went back to my Bob email file and found over 800 exchanges in the last 11 years. It's quite an archive. To tell you the truth, much of that treasure trove is not suitable for repetition today. It's either not politically correct or it's at the expense of someone who's in this room. So we'll leave that in the email file. But I just wanted to give you a few snippets that you might enjoy. Bob and I wondered frequently why people of our age, when they got in trouble, when they were in school, it was always the parents and the school versus the kid. And today, it's the kid and the parents versus the school. How did that change take place? He and I used to talk about it all the time. We never figured that one out. One thing that would always make Bob laugh is a quote he and I threw back and forth when the going really got tough on some issue. It's the line that Hyman Roth said to Michael Corleone in one of the Godfather films about not getting mad at the circumstances because, quote unquote, this is the life you've chosen. Even when there were dark clouds, for some reason, he loved that line. We always chuckled at the notion that almost all parents at some point think their child is gifted. It's natural for a parent to think that, so he always understood the motivation. When a student, however, got called on the carpet for having done something really dumb, one of us would invariably say, well, he is gifted. This would usually lead to a lot of laughter from Bob. Once during the summer, Bob and Rhona took a trip to the Canadian Rockies. I sent him a one-line email which said, "Seen a moose yet?" And his response was, actually, yes. Of course, I said it was a deer because I'm a mountaineer from Philadelphia. I was ridiculed not only by my wife, but also by every stranger around me. In one email, he recounted an unpleasant problem he had to deal with and closed with, to think that I was one course shy of becoming a rocket scientist instead of a Spanish teacher. Given the meeting that I described earlier when the last interview we had before Bob got hired, I like this one particularly. One great email had a last line that harkened back to that interview in 2008. It was 2014, 6 years later, and Bob said, "Am I able to say I'm Jewish yet, or is it still too early?" Another Bob classic. His email read, "By the way, I was called a jackass recently by a father at a meeting with his wife. The mom was so rude, insulting, and accusatory for so long a period of time that I had to require the mom to behave appropriately if the meeting were to continue. The meeting did not continue. So please behave, or you may not continue. I'm tough now. Love, Pumpkin. I'll miss those interactions very much. Bob had such a lightness of spirit. He was never happier than when he was with the kids, from lunches with the seniors to hanging out in WOW and pre-K. He just loved it so much. The pictures that went out when he stepped down a few weeks ago, some of which were on the screen during Over the Rainbow, they said it all. Many of the pictures are with the lower school kids, and the look on his face really was one of pure joy. The letters that accompanied them were very nice, but I told him that the photos spoke volumes about why he was just the best at what he did. One last character trait: Bob was always self-deprecating. He never felt he was one of the cool people. He called himself a nebbish. You can look that up in your Yiddish dictionary. At his family memorial service, a pamphlet was passed out with many photos in it. I didn't know if it would be here today, so I brought one. The cover picture was Bob in a tropical setting, wearing a black t-shirt and sunglasses. He just looked cool. He looked like he was in the Allman Brothers, for God's sake. And if I had told him he looked way cool like a rock star, I think he would have doubled over laughing for a long time. My head will miss the excellence he brought to this school. He was a game changer and an innovator, and he ran this school for 20% of the school's existence. My heart will miss my dear friend so much. We had so much fun together trying to have a positive impact on the lives of the kids that passed through under his watch. His last email to me was just before he went into the hospital. It read, "This is such a weird time of life for me. Hard to reconcile, hard to believe, hard to embrace, hard to believe there is much life left. Just a lot of crying and disbelief when I'm alone. Swimmingly yours, Mr. Happy." I'll miss Bob for what he did for this school. He leaves a very strong legacy. And I'll miss him personally for his insights, his dedication, his humor, and his wonderful friendship. God bless him.
I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and you. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. I see skies of blue. I hear babies cry. I watch them grow. They'll learn much more than I'll ever know. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Yes, I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
You know, during our administration team meetings or even during a casual conversation, Bob would always talk about his family. It'd be a story about his wife, Rona, or about his sons, Lee and Jesse, and it would always be followed by laughter. It was something really funny. Here today, we have both of his sons and, of course, his lovely wife, Rona, as well. Today, Lee's going to speak and come up here to the stage and share a few words.
Good afternoon, students, alumni, parents, teachers, board, and members of the community. My family and I would like to start by thanking you for such an amazing tribute to my father and the opportunity to speak with you today. When approached by senior Benjamin staff with the request to say a few words at this event, I of course asked, what do you, the attendees, want to hear from me? Of course, I was advised that you know him as Mr. Goldberg, the headmaster, but not necessarily as Bob the person. And there's a reason for that, which I'll touch on in a moment. But first, since we're at a school, by a show of hands, who of you are students or alumni? He was here because of you. And by a show of hands, who of you are parents, teachers, board, or committee members? He was here for you. And by a show of hands, who of you are others in the community, business owners, public servants, first responders, anyone and everyone? He was here to serve you by bettering the community by producing highly effective individuals. Bob Goldberg, Poppy to my boys, was born to a second-generation Jewish-American family in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania on February 11th, 1952. Younger brother to Richard Goldberg, a local business owner, marketing wizard, and community leader who's in this room today. I don't know much about the early years, other than it was mostly in black and white, according to the photographs. My grandfather, Charles, with the support of Ruth, my grandmother, opened and developed a successful business in a segment where it would be unlikely to do so by an Army vet with no formal education or money. With only perseverance in their checking account, my grandfather and his two brothers took Goldberg's Marine, a small retail store, to a global name through a famous mail-order catalog with stores and real estate holdings in Philadelphia and Manhattan. The brothers were told that it could not be done by them or otherwise. This desire to overcome was cultivated early on with my father. However, his passion lay in areas other than that of outboard motors and foul weather gear. But the lessons learned from one generation to the next transcends industry. cornerstones that are difficult to shape like a craftsman and apprentice, skill sets that are lost through time, if not practiced by the teacher and observed by the student. Only 3: ethics, moral principles, grit, strength of character, and resilience, the capacity to recover. It is easy to bend and flex and curve our decisions to meet an opportunity. It is difficult to stay strong. My father did not deviate, and neither do we. Fast forward to my childhood. I like to think of it as normal, typical for semi-rural Maryland. Rolling green, big yards, woods to get lost in, and memories to be found by. My father loved summer, probably because he was a teacher and it meant some time away, but more so because it meant time with our family. Also, as an educator, I imagine it was a time of renewal. Taught students moved on and fresh minds come in. We had a large pool that was available for swimming 3 months out of the year, and we got our use out of it. If you didn't know, Bob was quite OCD. This was mostly apparent with the cleanliness of the pool and the maintenance of the grounds. Putting the garden hose away was a 20-minute ordeal, as the coils had to be exact. If not, he started over. The pool and backyard were a place of made-up games. One was where he would say, "I love you. Do you love me?" to Jesse and I. If we said no, jokingly, he would pretend to box us up with tape and ship us to another continent. The sending would be a toss to another part of the pool where we would splash down and swim back laughing for another mailing until we had enough. To end the game, we simply had to say, "I love you" back. As a linguist, I imagine his interest in the poor pronunciation of words by his young boys was hilarious, along with words that we made up during gameplay. Things said at the age of 3 by Jesse or I were still in rotation up until his passing, never letting the fun subside and being sure to never grow up too much, even though we tried so hard to do so. Every few summers, the pool and overly coiled hose got a break, as the 4 of us would travel to Europe. Again, as a lover of languages and the human element, these must have been times of great excitement for him. Staying in apartments and houses before the internet, museums in France, swimming in Castle Lakes in Germany, arriving too late to Genoa, Italy, with the only available hotel being in the red light district. Acquiring lifelong friends in Kent, England, and making a late-night hospital visit after a carnival go-kart crash in Spain. They were the misadventures of the well-cultured, the Griswolds, perhaps. School year memories are made up of Jesse and I going to my father's office at McDonough to be picked up later by our mother, moving his meticulously placed pencils, unstacking his paper clips and rubber bands, and perhaps relocating an office treasure to the wrong side of the shelf. Being a teacher's child at a 125-year-old 1,000-acre private school was a unique experience in the 80s and 90s. Buildings were not locked and security was scarce, strange in retrospect. On afternoons or weekends, we would have free reign, visiting other teachers, playing with the librarians' kids who lived on campus, strolling up to the horse barn, or stealing the old metal numbers from the scoreboard to sled down the hills. In the evenings, after we fought about homework for 2 hours, we would watch Cheers or The Simpsons on a 10-inch television on my parents' dresser. This TV gave off so much static you could feel it across the room. When my mom called for bedtime is when the real shenanigans began. We had a game called Touched You Last, where to be the winner, you must be the last one to touch the other person. Sneak attacks, fake goodnight hugs, hiding in the closet forever, waiting to be checked on to pop out at the right time for a final touch. It drove my mother crazy that he would get us so hyper right before bed. There were several dark years as well, because of me. I was difficult in the worst kind of ways for a number of years after moving to Florida. New friends, authority, adolescence, learning disabilities, and chemical imbalances. I don't know, and at that time did not choose to care. What I do know is there were a lot of opportunities for my father to not pick me up in the middle of the night, to not pay for property damage caused by me, or to lose faith in what he was doing professionally because of how I behaved both at his school and at home. But he didn't, and I'm here, still doing what I can to return the favors. However, such debt comes without a payoff amount. He would share stories with me about difficult situations he would encounter at Pinecrest and Benjamin with loving, dedicated parents with a rudderless child. I was told that he would share my story of turning a corner, of how countless poor decisions can be forgiven after a good one, of how a single pivotal moment under the right conditions can create a future like a lightning strike clearing an overgrown forest for the health of new growth. After his passing, and before the funeral, we were asked to speak with a reporter from the Palm Beach Post. She asked what his hobbies were, and Jesse and I just laughed. He was old school, a throwback, a grinder. He worked. There were no hobbies. However, after 3 weeks of receiving letters, calls, social media replies, his peers from decades ago reaching out, and the comments made by you, I realized he did have a hobby. It was you. Your work was work, paper needed to be moved, money needs to be raised, and diplomas need to be signed. But what was not clear then, but was his passion, was you. My father was a collector of names, of dates, of stories, of circumstance and language. He collected nuance and place and granular details. The good stuff, the matter that makes up the finest of memories is the loose change that falls between the cushions. Don't take the milliseconds between the milestones for granted. I can barely recall my wedding 10 years ago this summer, but I love the memory of taking photos before with my grandparents, parents, brother, and friends. His love of language evolved into his love of communicating with each and every person who had something to say, kindergartners to titans of industry. Some say the most well-liked people in this world are those that listen most. I was amazed that his closest colleagues knew not of the family business, our pool, or travels. There is so much to share about a man that gave so much. Your love for my father has filled our hearts during such a difficult time, and he loved each and every one of you back. 3 weeks ago, in a mailbox store, I needed a photocopy of his death certificate for something. The clerk was giving me a hard time because of the type or format of the document, and a woman in the store turned to me, once realizing I was Bob Goldberg's son, and gave me a hug and said she would see me today. Her daughters attending University of Miami are Benjamin alumni, and she was, of course, a fan of my father. A memory created in a passing moment. Under what conditions in 2019 do strangers hug each other? How does one man unite a 45-year career to fill an 800-seat auditorium? Haddonfield Memorial High School, Pingree School, McDonough School, Canterbury School, Pinecrest School, the Benjamin School. One man to bring smiles to all. This is Bob Goldberg.
Thank you, Lee, and Jesse, for coming back here again to Benjamin and painting that picture of who Bob was at home and what he meant for them at home. Now to our final speaker today, someone who knew Bob not as his boss, but truly as his friend, who was with him from day one here at Benjamin, of course, our head of middle school, Chuck Hagee.
Good afternoon. After all that's been written about Bob in newspapers, magazines, on social media, and after all that's been said about him today, his history, all the compliments, the accolades, the great tribute that was given to him by his son Lee, Lee, that was wonderful. I feel more than ever at a loss for words. That's why I have to have some here in front of me. This being so, all I can add at this moment is that these last few weeks I've been doing a lot of thinking in particular about how we should remember this exceptional man. Proverbs says, the teaching of the wise is a fountain of life. And I would add love to that. Bob's legacy here will be the spirit of his wisdom and his love, moving us forward to make the Benjamin School better than ever. First, let's talk a bit about what Bob Goldberg taught us, our community. During his time at Benjamin, Bob inspired us to excellence, both in the way he served our students and in the strength of character he demonstrated, especially in the time following his diagnosis. Character, above all, is most essential. He showed us how to never stop fighting. Even against the greatest of odds, he never stopped hoping, and he never gave up. He taught us how to endure unimaginable hardship with grace, wisdom, and a sense of humor. And what a sense of humor he had. What spirit. Because of his example, we know what true courage and dignity look like. Even when faced with the most difficult of life's experiences, I should say especially when faced with life's most difficult experiences. Light is better than darkness, and hope is better than despair. These are just a few of the important lessons he's taught us that I'm confident the Benjamin School community will not forget. Next, I'd like to share a little about what he taught me. Mark Twain famously said that the two most important days in your life are the day you were born and the day you figure out why. Bob was one of those lucky people who understood and embraced the why of his life early on. He was always going to be a teacher. His why was always going to be to change the lives of children. I can picture him in class teaching and laughing with his students. That laugh would become a common fixture on both our campuses. He was fond of talking about his 45-year career in education. One could easily tell that he cherished every minute of his experiences with students, parents, and of course his colleagues. He loved what he did with all his heart. He spent his time as much as possible with students during the school day. Desk work came later on, often late into the evening. A typical sight would be the lamp glow from the head's office at the east end of Kennerly Field after dark. An important lesson. Once you find your why, work to nurture it. Never forget who you work for. In our case, nearly 1,100 children and their families. Upon his arrival at Benjamin, Bob quickly developed a reputation as a people person, a highly intelligent and talented problem solver with, of course, an outrageous sense of humor. We had never seen anything like him. Bob was expressive in his happiness to greet you and was effusive with his praise. Colleagues have shared with me that he made them feel so very important, feel that they mattered. I suspect that many of us have had this same experience over the past 11 years. In addition, his hellos could get physical, often with hand slapping and hugging. Well, here, hi Josh, let me show you. Lesson. It's so important to show people how much you care about them, especially your faculty. We're only as good as our teachers, Bob would say. During one of my early meetings with Mr. Goldberg in his office, he took a phone call, looked at me, and he said, "Come outside and meet my father," which I did. We walked outside of his office on the lower middle school campus, up to the passenger side of a car, and there standing was Bob's father, Mr. Charles Goldberg. He looked dapper in a suit, a very nice suit, and matching hat. We greeted each other. He looked at me, and he looked at Bob. He looked at me, and he looked at Bob. He looked at me again and started at my shoes, and then he did the same to Bob. Finally, he said, "Bob, I didn't know you could have such a good-looking friend." I just had to tell that story. Bob's father had really great taste. What I found so impressive and touching, though, was that Bob and Rona and Bob's brother and his wife had moved Bob's parents to Florida to care for them and spend time with them during their final years. This is a perfect expression of Bob's spirit, his love, and his responsibility. Lesson: even with all you do at school, don't forget to put your family first. One of Bob's first challenges at the Benjamin School was to lead us through the Great Recession of 2008, something he expertly did. From there, he would go on to pioneer many of the programmatic innovations the Benjamin School is known for today. More importantly, however, than anything, was that Bob led us through a transformation of culture. The Benjamin School's recent reaccreditation visit was a resounding affirmation of Bob's extraordinary leadership in this regard. The visit confirmed what we have all come to believe in Bob's time here. Quote, "The Benjamin School is a place where students truly love and appreciate their teachers, and where children learn to work together and take care of one another. More so, Benjamin students appreciate the breadth of their curricular experience, learning to live the school's Benjamin values." The Benjamin School really is an amazing place for children to learn and to grow. I believe Bob's greatest talent was that he truly understood that loving and nurturing children is the transformative power of our business, a business unlike any other. He urged us to invest every resource we have in our students and their futures. This is what drove him, and in turn, this is what drives us. This is the school Bob Goldberg has left behind. Well, that's not quite true. His spirit will continue to influence us as we move forward. This will be his impact, and this will be his legacy. Our community had the highest respect for him and the highest love. No leader could have done any better. Lesson: be courageous for what you believe in. Be courageous for what you believe in your gut is best for our students. Lastly, I want to say a few words about how to remember. In the end, we all die in medias res, Latin for in the middle of a story. In this case, our life's story. But these stories can be carried on by those whom we leave behind, by those who remember us. The following are some ways we as a community can remember Mr. Goldberg and carry on his story here at school. Mr. Archer? These are the top 10 ways to remember Mr. Goldberg. Number 10, character, above all, is most important. Number 9, have school spirit. Embrace the Benjamin experience. Number 8, take time for service to others. Number 7, listen to others and make them feel they matter. Number 6, take time to be in the moment. Number 5, work hard to find your why. I love that picture. Number 4, be kind and lift others up. Show people that you care. Number 3, have courage and work hard. Never give up. Number 2, have fun. Have a sense of humor. And number 1, put your family first. I hope that you will join me in keeping Bob's wife, Rona, son Lee and his family, son Jesse, the rest of the Goldberg family and friends, and the Benjamin School community in your prayers. More than anything, let's continue to work together to move this wonderful school forward as Bob would want us to do. And finally, a thank you. Thank you, Bob, our friend, for your unyielding commitment to our children and their families, for your tireless support of us, your faculty, staff, and administration, and for the inspiring example you will continue to be in the life of our school from now on. My thinking about Bob these past few weeks has reminded me of a line from William Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. That line reads, "He was gentle, and the elements mixed so well in him that nature may stand up and say to all the world, 'This was a man.'" Thank you. Please stand for the Benjamin School alma mater.
When the sun breaks free of the sea and dawn comes again, my alma mater fends me, beloved Benjamin, like a ray of shining light, welcomes me back home. Keep us in sight throughout the night, sweet Benjamin, her own. Nestled 'neath the palms, glorious and green, ever she's victorious, our alma mater queen. Through laughter and tears, we'll say ever true, we're buccaneers through all the years. We love you, orange and blue. We love you, orange and blue.
Well, thank you everyone for coming today. Before we wrap up, I should point out by name 2 people that were very special to Bob, that were with him through the best of days and the worst of days. Lola Arbazal and Jerry Cole. Please give them a round of applause. They were the executive assistants for Bob during his tenure here at Benjamin. All right, I'm just a hot mess right now. I apologize for that. Anyways, we're having a reception right afterwards, following at the Healy Gym. Please join us, and thank you for coming today and honoring Bob Goldberg.